In the annals of history, few tales resonate with the profound, melancholic echo of a great downfall quite like that of the Inca Empire. Imagine a civilization sprawling across vast Andean peaks and fertile valleys, forged by centuries of conquest and wisdom, reaching its zenith. Yet at the very moment of its greatest expansion, a fatal flaw, an internal schism, began to unravel its magnificent tapestry. This is the story of Atahualpa, the last emperor, whose personal tragedy became the empire's final, devastating act. Our narrative begins not with the thunder of hooves from a distant shore, but with the clashing of spears and the desperate cries of men upon their own sacred ground. The year was 1532, and the mighty Inca Empire, Tahuantinsuyu as it was known, meaning the four regions together, was tearing itself apart from within. Two half-brothers, sons of the deceased Sapa Inca Huayna Capac, were locked in a brutal struggle for ultimate power. Huascar, the legitimate heir, crowned in Cusco, the ancient capital, and Atahualpa, the ambitious, charismatic warrior, favored by the army and entrenched in the northern city of Quito. The conflict was more than a mere sibling rivalry. It was a civil war of unprecedented scale, ripping through the very fabric of Inca society. Villages were razed, populations decimated, and the intricate road network, the very arteries of the empire, became conduits for relentless armies rather than peaceful trade. Huascar, though holding the traditional seat of power, was seen by many as weak, perhaps even a betrayer of the old ways. Atahualpa, on the other hand, was a military genius, revered by his seasoned generals and loyal troops. He had spent years campaigning alongside his father, forging an unshakable bond with the empire's military elite. As the war raged, the omens were dire. Comets streaked across the night sky, earthquakes shook the mountains, and ancient prophecies whispered of a looming cataclysm. Was this the wrath of Inti, the sun god, displeased with his children's fratricide? Or was it merely the prologue to an even greater, unimaginable horror? The decisive moment came at the Battle of Chimborazo, then later, the Battle of Quipapan, a titanic clash that would seal Huascar's fate. Atahualpa's veteran commanders, Quizquiz and Chalcachima, unleashed their forces with surgical precision, crushing Huascar's weakened armies. The emperor himself was captured, his spirit broken, his reign brought to a humiliating end. With Huascar imprisoned and his loyalists purged, Atahualpa stood victorious. He had achieved absolute power, unifying the empire under his iron will, but at what cost? The empire was exhausted, its resources depleted, its spirit wounded. The long, bloody conflict had left deep scars, leaving a chasm of division that no victory could truly heal. Atahualpa, now the undisputed Sapa Inca, was poised to rebuild, to re-establish the glory of his ancestors. He celebrated his triumph in the thermal baths of Cajamarca, a place of peace and healing, unaware that his greatest challenge, a threat from an entirely different world, was already at his doorstep. For as the dust of civil war settled, a new, unsettling rumor began to ripple through the Andes. Strange, pale-faced men, riding beasts unknown to the Incas, had landed on the coast. They carried thunder in their hands and wore gleaming armor. Little did Atahualpa know that his victory, so hard-won, had inadvertently opened the door to a far greater, and ultimately unconquerable adversary. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only decide the fate of an emperor, but mark the tragic twilight of an entire civilization. As Atahualpa consolidated his hard-won victory, a shadow, distant yet inevitable, was lengthening over the vast, ancient lands of the Inca. Far from the towering peaks of the Andes, across a tumultuous, unknown sea, the seeds of an even greater upheaval had been sown. Our story now turns to a small, determined band of men, driven by an insatiable hunger for gold and glory, utterly oblivious to the complex tapestry of the civilization they were about to shatter. On a sun-baked coastline, a seasoned, ruthless adventurer named Francisco Pizarro had landed. He was a man hardened by years of exploration and conquest in the New World, fueled by ambition as boundless as the ocean itself. With him, he brought a mere 168 men, a shockingly small number against an empire that could field hundreds of thousands. Yet these were not ordinary men. They were equipped with steel, gunpowder, and a fervor born of their Christian faith, and a profound sense of European superiority. They rode magnificent beasts, horses, creatures entirely unknown to the Incas, whose thundering hooves and sheer size instilled awe and terror. The arrival of these strangers, these viracochas as some Incas might have called them, was met with a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and, crucially, misjudgment. The Inca worldview, deeply rooted in their cosmology and their understanding of their place in the natural world, struggled to comprehend these pale-skinned invaders. Were they gods returning from the sea, as ancient prophecies hinted? Were they simply another warring tribe, perhaps seeking tribute or alliance? This fundamental misunderstanding would prove fatal. Initial encounters were tentative. Inca scouts reported on these strange beings and their peculiar customs. They were fascinated by their metal armor that deflected spears, by their thunder sticks that spat fire, and by their swift, powerful horses. Yet there was no sense of imminent danger, no true comprehension of the existential threat these newcomers posed. The Incas had always known how to fight and conquer. They had built their empire through strategic alliances and overwhelming military might. But this enemy was different. They did not seek land or tribute in the traditional sense. They sought something far more abstract and far more destructive: gold and the very soul of a civilization. As Pizarro moved inland, he adopted a strategy born of desperation and cunning. He understood that his meager force could not possibly conquer the vast Inca empire through brute strength. His only hope lay in exploiting its internal divisions and striking at its very head. He received reports of the civil war that had just concluded, of Atahualpa's brutal victory, and of the empire's lingering disunity. This was the weakness he desperately needed. Word reached Atahualpa at Cajamarca, where he was resting after his triumph. The reports of these bearded ones were intriguing. He was a powerful emperor, having just crushed his brother. He commanded immense armies. Why should he fear a small group of foreign men? Perhaps they could be incorporated into his empire, or perhaps they held some new knowledge. He sent emissaries to Pizarro, inviting them to Cajamarca, a decision that would forever echo through history. He saw an opportunity for a display of his own power, to impress these visitors with the grandeur and might of the Inca Empire. Pizarro, a master manipulator, received the Inca envoys with a carefully constructed facade of humility and respect, all while meticulously gathering intelligence. He learned of Atahualpa's movements, his confidence, and his location. He saw his chance, a single, audacious strike that could bring down an empire. His eyes, cold and calculating, saw not merely a king, but a strategic target. The trap was meticulously set, hidden beneath a veneer of peaceful diplomacy. The stage was now perfectly arranged. On one side, the victorious, supremely confident Atahualpa, resting on the laurels of his recent conquest, unknowingly marching towards his doom. On the other, Pizarro, a desperate man with everything to gain, armed with superior technology, unwavering ambition, and a complete disregard for human life that was alien to the Inca way of war. Two worlds, vastly different in their understanding of power, wealth, and destiny, were about to collide in a moment that would forever alter the course of human history. The whispers of strangers had reached the heart of the empire, and their true, terrifying meaning was about to be revealed. The air in Cajamarca thrummed with anticipation. It was November 16, 1532, a date destined to be etched in the darkest pages of Inca history. Atahualpa, resplendent in his royal regalia, carried on a magnificent litter adorned with gold and feathers, surrounded by thousands of his unarmed nobles and attendants, entered the main plaza. His purpose was clear: to meet these curious strangers, to assess them, and perhaps to incorporate them into the grand design of his empire. His confidence, born of recent victory and the absolute power he wielded, was a cloak of fatal delusion. Pizarro, meanwhile, had meticulously laid his snare. The square of Cajamarca, usually a bustling marketplace, had been cleared. Spanish soldiers, fully armed, with muskets loaded and swords at the ready, were hidden in the surrounding buildings, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and ferocious anticipation. Cannons were strategically placed, aimed directly at the plaza. It was a trap, subtle yet devastating, designed not for battle but for a swift, decisive act of treachery. As Atahualpa's procession, a dazzling display of Inca might and splendor, filled the square, a solitary figure emerged from the Spanish quarters. Friar Vicente de Valverde, accompanied by an interpreter. He approached the emperor, crucifix in hand, and began to preach, demanding that Atahualpa convert to Christianity and acknowledge the sovereignty of King Charles I of Spain. This moment, laden with historical irony, was a profound clash of worlds, a collision of belief systems that simply could not comprehend one another. Atahualpa, accustomed to being revered as a living god, listened with a mixture of confusion and disdain. He examined the Bible offered to him, placing it to his ear, and hearing nothing, he cast it aside. To him, it was a meaningless object, an insult to his own deities and traditions. But to Valverde and crucially to Pizarro, this was the ultimate blasphemy, the justification for what was about to unfold. "Dogs of war," Valverde reportedly cried out, "I absolve you." That cry was the signal. From every hidden alcove, from every building surrounding the plaza, burst forth the Spanish conquistadors. The thunder of their muskets, the terrifying roar of their cannons, and the charging hooves of their horses unleashed an unimaginable chaos. The plaza, moments before filled with the vibrant colors of Inca ceremony, became a scene of horrifying slaughter. The unarmed Incas, caught completely by surprise, had no chance. They were mown down by gunfire, trampled by horses, and cut to pieces by steel swords, weapons alien to their bronze and stone armaments. Amidst the pandemonium, the target was clear: Atahualpa. Pizarro, with a chilling resolve, led the charge towards the emperor's litter. The Inca nobles, fiercely loyal, threw themselves in front of their lord, forming a human shield, their devotion costing them their lives. Many had their hands severed trying to prevent the litter from falling, but still, they held it aloft. Pizarro himself was said to have suffered a minor hand injury in the desperate melee to reach the emperor, shouting, "Let no one touch the Inca! Let no one touch the Inca!" Finally, with a brutal thrust, Atahualpa was pulled from his litter, a captive in his own land, in his own square. The massacre continued around him, a horrific testament to the Spanish ruthlessness. Thousands of Incas lay dead, their sacrifice a testament to their unwavering loyalty, their blood staining the sacred ground of Cajamarca. This was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was an ambush, an act of calculated deceit that exploited the Incas' ritualistic approach to diplomacy and their profound sense of honor. Atahualpa, a brilliant military strategist in his own right, had simply failed to grasp the boundless perfidy of his new adversaries. He had walked willingly into a cage, believing himself to be the hunter, only to discover too late that he was the prey. The undisputed ruler of the vast Inca Empire was now a prisoner. His fate, and the fate of his magnificent civilization, sealed in a single, brutal, and unforgettable moment of betrayal. With Atahualpa captured, a chilling silence fell over the blood-soaked plaza of Cajamarca, a silence broken only by the triumphant shouts of the Spanish and the moans of the dying. The vast Inca Empire, once so formidable, found itself headless, its very heart held in the iron grip of a few hundred men. Pizarro, understanding the immense power he now wielded, saw not merely a king, but a treasure chest. And Atahualpa, recognizing the insatiable greed in his captor's eyes, saw his only path to survival. It was in this desperate crucible that Atahualpa made an offer that defies belief, a promise of wealth so colossal it has become legendary. From his captivity, surrounded by the ever-watchful, avaricious eyes of his Spanish guards, the emperor spoke through an interpreter. He gestured to the room in which he was held, a chamber approximately 22 feet long and 17 feet wide. "I will fill this room with gold," he declared, "as high as I can reach." Then, pointing to an adjacent, smaller room, he added, "And I will fill it twice over with silver." The sheer audacity of the offer stunned the Spanish, even Pizarro himself. Could such wealth even exist? Atahualpa, ever the master of his domain, guaranteed the ransom would be delivered within 2 months. His terms were simple, his life in exchange for an unprecedented fortune. It was a gamble born of absolute desperation, a desperate bid for freedom from a man who had never known anything but dominion. And so, the Inca Empire, under the grim directive of its imprisoned emperor, began to dismantle its own accumulated wealth. Messengers were dispatched across the vast network of Inca roads, carrying the emperor's command to the farthest corners of his realm. From temples, palaces, and royal storehouses, gold and silver objects began to flow towards Cajamarca. Gold, sacred to the Incas as the sweat of the sun, and silver, the tears of the moon, were not mere commodities. They were symbols of divinity, representations of their gods, painstakingly crafted into exquisite idols, ornaments, and ceremonial objects. Imagine the scene: vast caravans, laden with shimmering artifacts, making their way through the rugged Andean landscape. Golden llamas, intricate figurines of gods and goddesses, ceremonial masks, intricate wall coverings, and vessels of all shapes and sizes, all meticulously crafted by master Inca artisans. Each piece, a testament to a rich culture and profound spiritual belief, was destined to be melted down, stripped of its artistic and religious significance, reduced to mere bullion for the Spanish coffers. The Spaniards, meanwhile, watched with growing excitement and barely contained avarice. They began to mark the wall of Atahualpa's room with the proposed height, a chilling visual contract of the emperor's desperate pledge. As the days turned into weeks, the room slowly, painstakingly began to fill. Gleaming artifacts piled higher and higher, a mountain of precious metals growing before their astonished eyes. The air itself must have seemed to shimmer with the reflected light of the sun and moon, now brought together in one overwhelming, glittering mass. Yet even as the gold flowed, doubts began to gnaw at the Spanish. Would Atahualpa truly fulfill his promise? Was this a ploy? And even if he did, what then? His power was immense. Releasing him, even for such a ransom, could prove to be a grave mistake. The internal struggle within the Spanish camp intensified, a battle between sheer greed and strategic paranoia. The ransom room, meant to be Atahualpa's salvation, was slowly becoming his gilded cage, a stark monument to both his immense wealth and his profound, tragic vulnerability. The unprecedented gamble had begun, but its outcome remained veiled in a fog of anticipation and treacherous intent. The ransom room in Cajamarca now glittered, a breathtaking testament to the Inca empire's unimaginable wealth. Gold piled higher than a man could reach, and silver, stacked in shimmering heaps, fulfilled Atahualpa's desperate promise. The Spanish, their eyes wide with disbelief and insatiable desire, had received their unprecedented bounty. The time for Atahualpa's release, according to their own agreement, should have arrived. Yet, as the last ounce of treasure was counted and melted into ingots, a far more sinister plan began to take shape. The very notion of releasing Atahualpa became a source of intense debate and paranoia within the Spanish camp. Some argued that keeping him alive was a constant threat, a rallying point for any potential Inca rebellion. Others, including the more pragmatic and, dare we say, slightly more honorable elements, believed that Pizarro should honor his word. But the overriding sentiment, fueled by fear and a hunger for absolute control, ultimately tipped the scales towards treachery. Francisco Pizarro, cold and calculating, understood that the emperor, even as a captive, commanded immense loyalty. Atahualpa was the living embodiment of the Inca state, a sacred figure to his people. His continued existence, even if imprisoned, cast a long shadow over Spanish aspirations for total dominion. A fabricated justification for his execution was needed, a thin veneer of legality to mask a heinous act. And so a sham trial was hastily convened, a grotesque mockery of justice. The charges leveled against Atahualpa were as numerous as they were baseless, designed to paint him as a monster deserving of death. He was accused of idolatry, a standard charge against indigenous peoples who refused to convert to Christianity. He was charged with polygamy, a common practice among Inca royalty but a sin in European eyes. More grievously, he was accused of incest, a practice also accepted within the Inca royal lineage to maintain the purity of the bloodline. But the most damning and utterly false accusation was that he was inciting rebellion against the Spanish from his prison cell. He was even accused of murdering his brother Huascar, a deed that, while true, was a consequence of their civil war, not a crime against Spain. The trial itself was a farce. Atahualpa, bewildered by the foreign legal concepts and the accusations leveled against him, had no true advocate. His testimony was interpreted through men loyal to Pizarro, often twisted and misrepresented. The judges were Pizarro's own men, their verdict predetermined by their commander's will and their collective thirst for ultimate power. Voices of dissent, such as that of Hernando de Soto, who argued for Atahualpa's innocence and the injustice of the proceedings, were brutally silenced or ignored. De Soto himself was conspicuously absent, having been sent on an expedition by Pizarro, conveniently out of the way for the impending travesty. The verdict, delivered with chilling swiftness, was guilty on all counts. The sentence, death by burning at the stake. This was not merely an execution. It was a punishment reserved for heretics, designed to eradicate the very memory of the condemned. To the Inca, whose belief system held that a body must remain whole for the soul to pass into the afterlife, death by fire was the ultimate spiritual annihilation, a cruelty beyond measure. Atahualpa, facing the ultimate betrayal, remained remarkably composed. Even in the face of such profound injustice, the last Inca emperor maintained a quiet dignity, a silent defiance. His immense ransom had been paid, his promise fulfilled. Yet the Spanish had no intention of honoring their end of the bargain. The shackles of deceit had been firmly clamped upon him, and his fate, sealed by greed and fear, was now tragically inevitable. The stage was set for the final, devastating act of a sovereign betrayed, and an empire brought to its knees. Understood. Chapter 5 has been approved. I will now proceed with developing Chapter 6, the final chapter, which will include a strong closing reflection and a call to action. The sun, the very essence of Inca divinity, seemed to cast a mournful glow on the evening of July 26, 1533. In the plaza of Cajamarca, the same ground where a proud emperor had been so cunningly ensnared, the scaffold was prepared. Atahualpa, the last truly independent Sapa Inca, was led to his final moments. His people, those who remained and dared to witness, watched in horrified silence, their world collapsing before their very eyes. How could their living god, the son of Inti, be brought so low? The Spanish had decreed death by burning, a punishment meant to utterly destroy, both physically and spiritually. But even at this ultimate precipice, a final act of manipulation unfolded. Friar Vicente de Valverde approached Atahualpa one last time, offering him a choice: embrace Christianity and be garroted, strangled to death, or face the agony of the pyre. To a people who believed in the preservation of the body for the afterlife, the garrote, though still a violent death, was a lesser evil than being consumed by flames. In a desperate bid to preserve his spiritual essence, Atahualpa agreed to be baptized, taking the name Francisco in honor of his captor, Pizarro. With this grim concession, the final, humiliating act of betrayal was complete. The cord tightened around his neck, and the last true emperor of the Incas, a man who had reigned supreme just months before, passed from this world. His death was not just the end of a life, it was the symbolic execution of an entire empire. The immediate aftermath was one of profound chaos and despair. The Spanish, now with no living Inca ruler to legitimize their conquest, hastily installed a puppet emperor, first Taparpa, then Manco Inca Yupanqui, but their authority was a mere illusion. The intricate tapestry of Inca society, built on a foundation of divine rule and meticulous organization, began to unravel with terrifying speed. Without their sacred head, the social, political, and spiritual order fractured. The people were disoriented, their faith shaken, their resistance scattered. The wealth continued to flow into Spanish hands, but it was a poisoned bounty, bringing with it not prosperity but an insatiable thirst that would forever plague the conquistadors. The once thriving Inca cities, symbols of a magnificent civilization, soon stood desolate or were razed to build new Spanish settlements atop their ruins, a physical manifestation of conquest and erasure. The vibrant culture, the sophisticated agricultural systems, the unparalleled road network, all suffered under the brutal efficiency of colonial rule. Atahualpa's tragic story echoes through the corridors of time as a chilling testament to the devastating collision of worlds. His brilliance as a leader, his courage in the face of insurmountable odds, and his ultimate misjudgment of European deceit combined to form a narrative of almost unbearable pathos. He was a king who offered a room full of gold, only to find that his captors desired something far more valuable and utterly intangible: absolute power over his people and the very soul of his empire. His legacy, therefore, is not merely that of a defeated emperor, but of a figure embodying the ultimate sacrifice, a symbol of a glorious civilization brutally extinguished. His final moments remind us of the fragility of even the mightiest empires when confronted by an enemy wielding not just superior weapons, but a radically different, more ruthless moral code. The room filled with gold, once a symbol of hope, became instead a tombstone, a monument to a king's desperation and an empire's irreversible fall. And so, we conclude this journey into the heart of a profound historical tragedy. The story of Atahualpa is a somber reminder of the unforgiving currents of history, where ambition clashes with unforeseen forces, and where a civilization, however grand, can be brought to its knees by betrayal and misunderstanding. If you found this deep dive into the end of an empire as captivating as we did in exploring it, We invite you to join our growing community of history enthusiasts. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful and often heartbreaking stories to life. Consider subscribing to our channel, hitting that notification bell, and sharing this video with anyone who appreciates the dramatic sweep of human history. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and remember the echoes of the past that shape our present.